Okay,
Okay, perfect. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we're all good.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. We are Team Black, also known as the Amazing Amygdalas, and we're going to be talking about neuroimaging today. Just a little disclaimer, the people, our teammates that presented or made this presentation aren't here today, so we're taking over. So we're sorry if we have any technical difficulties.
So in our group, we created a research article that was done by Melanie and I. We also created an infographic and the slideshow that was created by Rafael and Ayomide. And then we also created a game that was created by Ananya. Next slide.
So we're going to be talking about the infographic and the slideshow today, as well as some article findings and some key developments that we found when we were researching.
So here's the infographic that Rafael and Ayomide had created. So on here, we have all the information and we've condensed that information onto our slideshow. So we'll just be giving that information in that way, but here's how you guys can just see the infographic.
So then what exactly is neuroimaging? Neuroimaging is a discipline that studies the structure and function of the nervous system, and that is done via the means of imaging technology. As you can see here on the left, this is some type of neuroimaging techniques, and we're going to be talking more in depth about different ones.
So what neuroimaging does to society. So in terms of the performance and interpretation, neuroimaging is able to perform many different imaging techniques in clinical settings and neuroscientific research. This allows us to interpret and visualize the data and that is collected to draw relevant conclusions. Next slide.
And then still talking about how neuroimaging impacts society, there's also aspects of development and enhancement. So neuroimaging does help identify specific characteristics of diseases. So different neuroimaging techniques can cater to specific uses. And then we can also talk about how developing techniques and parameters can reflect neurophysiological activities in the brain.
So in terms of research that's come out of neuroimaging techniques, it's usually done with a fusion of neuroimaging techniques. So in this diagram that we see here, this was an example of a study that used simultaneously MRIs and PET scans to show a more comprehensive approach to assessments in patients with neurological disorders. Next slide.
And then still talking about some research, neuroimaging has been known to incorporate novel technologies. So here you can see how artificial intelligence, such as machine learning and radiomics, have enhanced the diagnostic and predictive function of AI in patients with meningioma. And meningioma is a specific type of brain tumor, and you can see the tumor here as is shown in the neuroimaging technique.
So some notable people within the field of neuroimaging include Angelo Mosso, who is an Italian physiologist who invented the first neuroimaging technique, which was called human circulation balance. He began by recording the pulsation of the human cortex in patients with skull defects. Another person was Edward Joseph Hoffman, who invented the first human PET scanner in 1973, a commonly used whole body scanning procedure for detecting diseases like cancer. William Henry Oldendorf was an American neurologist, physician, researcher, medical pioneer, and founding member of the American Society for Neuroimaging. And he was the originator for the technique of computed tomography, which is also known as CT scan. And Carl John Friston is a British neuroscientist at University College London and an authority on brain imaging. He gained reputation as the main proponent of the free energy principle. Next slide.
And then talking about career opportunities, Obviously, neuroscience is a very interdisciplinary field, so there's a lot to do in terms of neuroimaging. There is cognitive neuropsychologists, there is developmental cognitive neuropsychologists. You can also work in academia based on a university where you can do teaching and research. You can also work in a school as a neuropsychology consultant. And also outside of academia, you can work as a neuropsychologist researcher for both public and private organizations.
To continue with more career pathways in neuroimaging, you can become a neuropathology specialist, a behavioral neuropsychologist, forensic neuropsychologist, rehabilitation neuropsychologist, and a dementia neuropsychologist. So this shows that there are many different applications for neuroimaging in the medical and engineering field. Next slide.
And then talking a little bit about our research article that we wrote, similar to what we see in this presentation, we talk about the history of neuroimaging. Specifically, we talk about how before neuroimaging was invented, psychologists and physicians really didn't have a lot to go based off of, except for clinical symptoms and behavior. They couldn't actually see inside the brain unless it was an autopsy. So we kind of go through the history of neuroimaging and all the revolutionary technology that was invented in the 20th century. We talk about some impressive variety of neuroimaging techniques, such as the CT, the MRI, the PET scan, the fMRI, and the MRE. We talk about how each of these function and their applications in neuroimaging. So for example, the CT and the MRI are known as structural neuroimaging techniques, since these neuroimaging methods show the structure of the brain, while functional neuroimaging focuses on how the brain goes and performs certain activities. So the PET scan and the fMRI are better used to see functionality within the brain. And we also talk about invasive versus non-invasive methods. And what that means by invasive is that some of these procedures require radiation exposure or an actual tracer, so injecting a patient with radioactive tracers. And that's seen in PET scans and also in CT since radiation is used. And some of these methods are non-invasive, like MRIs and fMRIs, where it's just the use of the magnetic fields can produce a very viable image. We also talk about research on neurodegenerative diseases and how neuroimaging is revolutionizing and really advancing studies on Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. We're seeing how just using images of the brain is helping with the early diagnosis and better treatment options for these neurodegenerative diseases.
So here are more resources if you guys are looking to go deeper into neuroimaging. So here are some books and journals and studies that were done in terms of neuroimaging. Next slide.
So thank you so much, everyone, for listening to us today. We really appreciate it. And then here are some references that were used when creating this presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Now is the opportunity for our participants to ask any questions they may have in the chat. Okay, looks like there are no questions. Thank you, Melanie and Akriti and the entire Amygdala, Amazing Amygdala group. You guys did a great job.